Hello there, my name is Jeff Woolsey. I'm a Principal Program Manager in Windows Server focused on hybrid cloud. Today, joining me is...
Hello everyone, my name is Vijay Tewari. I'm a director in the Azure Stack team.
And it's really a pleasure to be here to talk to you today about Azure and the things that we're doing in the world of Azure and Azure Stack. Now, when it comes to Microsoft Azure, we have 4 core pillars, and today we want to really drill into one of those specifically, which is hybrid. If you look at some of the trends in the IT industry, I'm sure you've seen this, Vijay. There's a number of things going on right now. Folks are in the mode where they want to really upgrade and modernize their applications and infrastructure. And in the Windows Server side, one of the things that's driving that modernization of infrastructure is hyperconverged infrastructure. Hyperconverged infrastructure is about taking servers, modern servers with lots of cores, lots of memory, lots of resources, and flash, putting all of these together, coupling them with standard Ethernet switches, and applying the magic of software, whether it's software-defined compute, software-defined storage, or networking, so that you can put all of these together, reduce your costs, and run your platforms and your infrastructure with better security, better uptime, and as well connect it up to the cloud. At the same time, of course, we're in the process of doing application innovation as well.
Right, and what's going on is that almost every company is transforming itself into a software company because they have lots of assets, but today's customers are expecting modern ways of being able to interact with the business. And so therefore, all these companies are basically using modern techniques to modernize their application portfolio and using their internal data systems, IT infrastructure to offer unique applications to their customers. And as a part of that journey, they're actually taking their existing application portfolios and then actually modernizing them so they can offer these unique services to their customers. And that means using cloud services, using SaaS services where relevant, using PaaS services where relevant, and where relevant, still continue to use modern infrastructure as a service. In addition to that, they're using modern development techniques like using NoSQL, using blobs, tables, queues, using containers, and sort of stringing these together to develop these modern applications. In addition to that, another industry trend that's emerged is that customers are actually deploying these application assets both in their data centers and in the public cloud, because in certain scenarios it makes sense for them to be able to have that asset in their data center, whether it's for governance or regulatory reasons, or whether it's for latency reasons. And in some cases, the public cloud provides a robust platform and a flexible platform on which they can actually develop and offer these services to their customers. So we're actually seeing these multiple trends in the industry. And what Microsoft has is a portfolio of capabilities that can address all customer requirements in these various trends that we're actually seeing in the industry. So tell me a little more about why, hybrid, Jeff. Help me understand that a little bit.
It's really interesting. When I talk with customers, I tend to hear a very similar story that starts to come up out over and over again, which is a lot of folks saying, look, I was unsure of the cloud. Now that I've seen it, now that it's real, now that it's being used everywhere, I really want to adopt it more and more. And I see very common workloads that just make the move to cloud. A perfect example of that is Exchange. A lot of people, have teams that have been delivering and managing their mail services, and they say, you know what, I have this great team, really smart people on this team, but you know what? At the end of the day, they're delivering mail. Wouldn't it be great if I could just move this all up to Office 365, let Microsoft handle my mail, my SharePoint, my Office 365, and take these folks and actually help them building these new applications. As you mentioned, really companies becoming more software driven, have these folks help me develop the next generation of applications for my organization to actually drive more business value, more responsive to their customers. And so really, let's focus and move a bunch of those up to Office 365. Then there are some workloads that I see that actually tend to go into both places. SQL is a perfect example of that. I see people that say, you know what, I have some SQL databases I absolutely want to move up to the cloud because I want to take advantage of machine learning and AI, and I really want to be able to mine this data. And what's fascinating is when you talk to a customer, very often they'll tell me, yeah, I got 20 years of legacy data. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's not legacy data. That's your business. Think about it. If you've got 20 years or more, or some heritage and pedigree behind your organization, you have all of this data. Well, what are you doing to mine it? to actually build better services for your customers and grow as an organization, as a business. And so by actually incorporating machine learning and AI, you can start to go through that data and mine it and deliver powerful insights for developing those next generation applications. Now, in some cases, people will tell me, hey, I've got some databases that are absolutely going to stay on premises too. Because you know what? This database is talking to my legacy, my legacy mainframe. Or it's talking, as you mentioned, latency. It's talking to a specific device, and I need to make sure that for these latency reasons that it's got to stay on-prem. So I see SQL in databases as something it's happening in both places. And so hybrid gives you the best of all of these worlds. I want to be able to run things on premises. I want to take advantage of the cloud. And most importantly, can the cloud also help me with my on-premises? Whether it's backing up data, whether it's actually reducing the data center footprint because I'm moving things to the cloud, but the things that are core that have to stay on premises, I can actually give better services to, better uptime, deliver more services as well. And you're seeing this as well in the Azure Stack side as well. So what has hybrid meant for you in terms of Azure Stack?
Right, and as customers have started to modernize their applications, they have various reasons where the application potentially still needs to stay on premises. We see your customers, you talked about speed of light being an issue. And so what customers then want to do is they want to be able to develop the application once and then be able to deploy it depending upon its needs, either on premises or in the public cloud. So that's another aspect of hybrid where customers want a variety of different environments over which to actually be able to deploy their applications. Another example of this is where customers want to be able to actually use remote services, whether it's disaster recovery and failover into the cloud, whether it happens to be external monitoring infrastructure which can sit in the public cloud and monitor on-premises infrastructure. You can have automation capabilities that can actually run against your infrastructure from external public cloud capabilities. And so we have a variety of such reasons, as Forrester points out, for where customers are actually moving towards hybrid. But when you actually move towards hybrid, there are actually a bunch of challenges that customers are facing when they actually go into a hybrid environment. One of the first ones that people deal with is identity. Because customers are going to spread their application and assets across both a public cloud and an on-premises environment. Now, the last thing you want when you want to operate a secure environment is to actually have separate identities for the public and the on-premises environment.
Exactly.
Because that becomes an operational challenge for customers. So therefore, with Azure Active Directory, we actually have a very powerful asset which allows customers to actually utilize a common identity framework across both their public cloud and on-premises assets.
And you get the benefits like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication that's simply part and parcel with this identity framework we've got.
Exactly, right? And then subsequently, when you want to move into a cloud-based environment, you want to move from a pure CapEx environment to more like an operational OpEx kind of an environment, in which case you want a consistent model for being able to bill and charge back across both these environments. And that actually is a pretty challenging thing for customers to do, because there isn't any other cloud provider, unlike Microsoft, that actually has an on-premises environment which offers a cloud on-premise with Azure Stack and a public cloud with Azure, both of which are built and offered in a similar manner.
And I think this is a really important point, and I don't think Vijay would ever say this because he's too humble a guy. But when people ask me about Azure Stack, very often they say, well, how does this compare to the other guys? How does this compare to on-prem virtualization? Or how does Azure Stack compare? I'm like, stop. Azure Stack is its own category because of exactly what you just said. It is truly bringing the cloud experience on premises, whether it's the application or the billing model. And I think what you guys have done in Azure Stack has been absolutely amazing.
Right. And one of the things that Azure Stack actually brings to customers and actually solves a key challenge that customers have with the customers in their on-premises hybrid environments is the consistency between a public cloud and an on-premises environment. Because, it's hard to actually train developers. And once developers like a particular environment, they want to be able to utilize that paradigm across a variety of different constraints that they have to live with in the application space. And that's where the consistency between Azure and Azure Stack, or rather development opportunity that we offer, a consistency between Azure Stack is unique and enables customers to overcome one of the big challenges they have in the context of adopting hybrid. So let's talk a little bit about what are the various hybrid approaches that we have. We have sort of two pivots that we take in the context of hybrid. The first one is to say that assets that sit on premises can connect to services in the cloud. Examples of this are, I've got a database on premises, but I want to be able to back it up. I can back it up to the cloud using Azure Backup. I've got a virtual machine that's running on premises, but I want, under disaster scenarios, to be able to fail that over into Azure. And so you can use Azure Site Recovery. I want to be able to run a bunch of security tools against my on-premises infrastructure. So we've got Azure Security Center, which can do things like measure your baseline for security, give you recommendation for updates. All these things are capabilities which are services which are available in the cloud, which on-premise assets can connect to. That's one aspect of hybrid. The other aspect of hybrid is to actually provide consistency between the application development environment that is in the public cloud and the on-premises cloud. And that's where Azure Stack provides this consistent environment where developers can develop applications which can be deployed both on-premises or on Azure, insofar as you maintain and take a dependency on the services that are available in Azure Stack. So Microsoft actually has a pretty robust portfolio across the entire spectrum of hybrid approaches that customers can actually take. So let's talk a little bit about the portfolio that Microsoft has in terms of our hybrid platforms. And obviously the top of the stack is Azure.
Yes.
We are a global presence. We recently launched our data centers in South Africa. We are available in 54 regions, a plethora of PaaS and SaaS capabilities which are available for customers to develop modern applications or just migrate their virtual machines into the cloud and utilize those to modernize their infrastructure, modernize their applications. Then for customers who are concerned about latency, for example, they need an environment which is cloud, but it is in their data centers or in their environments. And that's where we have Azure Stack as a portfolio. And lastly, we got large number of customers who've got these heritage applications, running Windows Server, running line of business applications, and they need to modernize their infrastructure in the data centers as well. And Windows Server has provided a robust infrastructure there. And now we are taking the step to actually call it Azure Stack HCI, but it's bringing all the training and learning that customers had as Windows Server and bringing it forward to the customers.
And this is really an important point because we have so many folks that know how to manage Windows Server. They know how to deploy it. They know lifecycle management. They know the full end-to-end management of what it takes to run Windows Server. They're comfortable and confident with that. And also they like the fact that Windows Server gives them flexibility around, OEM of choice, hardware platform of choice, and lots of different flexibility in the platform itself. At the same time, we also know that customers are saying, look, I want to be able to do more and more with the cloud. And I do have these traditional heritage, that's a nice way to say it, legacy application heritage, classic app, whatever you want to call it. They're these older applications that for whatever reason are going to continue to run in a VM, okay? And I've heard every reason under the sun, some of them hilarious, some of them not so hilarious. Literally, hey, we don't have the setup disks for this application, or we don't have the source code for it, or the person who wrote this doesn't work here anymore, whatever the reason. But it's going to continue to run in a VM. But that said, we need to make sure that it's still secure. We also need to make sure that we can move it to a modern platform that's secure. And so Azure Stack HCI is about providing that next click stop in the portfolio of Azure Stack solutions that also gives you that connectivity, that ability to plug into Azure to give you things like better backup, better site recovery, secure network connectivity through an Azure network adapter right up into Azure so that you can take advantage of those Azure services, and so much more that we're going to be adding there. So we've got a lot to dig into today.
Yep, absolutely. So let's start by talking a little bit about what is Azure Stack, right? So Azure Stack is Microsoft's on-premises cloud portfolio, which effectively means we are taking a subset of the Azure services and bringing them to you in your data center so you can operate them either in a connected environment, as in you can be connected to Azure when you do this, or you can be completely disconnected from Azure. That's essentially what Azure Stack is. And there are three use cases that we see for customers when they actually adopt Azure Stack. One is in edge and disconnected scenarios. Classic example of this is I've got a customer who's actually going to deploy applications in the North Sea on an oil rig. That's not going to have a lot of connectivity to the public cloud. But yet, they're going to have a whole bunch of IoT data that needs to be processed and made sense of. So that's where that customer is actually deploying Azure Stack in that oil rig, so they actually can run and collect IoT data, use a cloud modernized application on that Azure Stack instance to actually make sense of it. And then with the limited bandwidth that they have, they can send up some amount of the data back up into Azure to actually do more kinds of stuff in that environment. A second example is, we've got customers who want to be able to abide by the regulatory and governance requirements and sovereignty requirements for data. We have many countries which are laying down that citizen data cannot leave the geographies of that country. Now, we've got an example of an auditor who's got an application which is actually deployed in the public cloud for the countries which allow the data to go there. But the same application for countries which don't allow the data to leave can be now deployed on Azure Stack because of the consistency of development environments between Azure and Azure Stack. And so those auditors, even if they move from one country to the other, they're still dealing with the same application. The application is managed in exactly the same way, yet by virtue of the consistency, you got a unique offering that Microsoft can offer to that ISV for that application to be available. And lastly, we've got customers who got large amounts of data in their data centers. And today with modern cloud application development techniques, they can actually use and slice and dice the data and create new innovative solutions out of this. Now, you can either take all the data and move it to the public cloud, or with Azure Stack, you can actually bring, the cloud services to the data center, not have to worry about the latency, and then utilize the data and develop these modern applications. So these are sort of three unique ways that we are actually seeing customers adopt cloud computing. And we are seeing this happen across all industries. So we are seeing this across financial services. You can take an example of a company who's actually going to build a loan application model, if you will. And they're going to use Azure to be able to train using artificial intelligence and machine learning, train the models which will identify if the entity whose you're going to give the loan to is actually a reliable entity that you should give a loan to. And they have historical trend analysis that they can do in Azure. But once the model is trained, you can actually push the trained model down to an Azure Stack instance that's running in a branch office. And then as the applicant enters their data, that machine learning model can then help the banker understand if that particular customer is an eligible customer for loan applications.
And we both know that in the world of financial services, very often these folks are still using mainframes.
Exactly.
Okay, so they may be wanting to upgrade the application. The mainframe is still probably there and is going to be there for some time, but now they can modernize those applications that the teller and people are actually interacting and hiding away all that complexity of the mainframe.
Exactly.
While taking advantage of the AI going on in Azure. So what you're really getting is a really rich cloud experience from the cloud to cloud on-prem, even talking to a legacy system.
And this is an example of sort of a hybrid pattern where you're actually doing something in Azure and something in Azure Stack. And another example I'll give you is retail. Right, so we've got a lot of retailers who are basically developing modern techniques inside the store, where, for example, inventory management is quite challenging. So they're now actually putting up these sophisticated cameras up in the store, and the cameras are basically looking down at the shelves. And when your box of cereals are running out, they can actually signal to the store manager that your inventory is running low. You need to go order more boxes of cereal. Now, how does it actually work? These cameras actually are taking video streams. That video stream is actually analyzed in the store itself by use of something like an Azure Stack or a Databox Edge.
Well, think about that for just a sec. That's a really important point, because do you really want all of that video? Do you really want to stream that all over your network up to the public cloud to do all of that analysis?
No.
No, you want to do that right there.
In fact, the cost of transporting the data all the way to the cloud can become prohibitive, because some of these stores literally have very low bandwidth connections, just about enough to be able to manage their financial transactions, but not to be able to transfer massive amounts of video images.
Well, and imagine you got 20 HD cameras. Think about just how much data we're talking about. So it really isn't practical in that case to try and stream that all to the cloud. Do that all locally.
Right.
Makes a ton of sense.
And then we've got examples of, like, for example, there is this tofu factory in Southeast Asia, which is actually using Azure Stack to actually manage their entire factory plant can't. And so, they have a bunch of applications which are running in virtual machines, which actually interact with their with various assets inside the factory. And they obviously can't connect to the public cloud because of latency reasons. So they're using modern techniques, but in the context of a cloud inside the factory to be able to manage that particular factory.
Very cool.
And lastly, we've got public sector customers, whether they're defense customers or government customers who are actually utilizing, Azure Stack in their cloud environments. For example, a Ministry of Home Affairs in a particular country, which is actually deploying Azure Stack because they want to be able to utilize modern techniques, but they are a government agency. They can't actually connect to the public cloud because of the laws as dictated by that country. And so they're utilizing Azure Stack as a cloud environment inside their solution space. So, let's talk a little bit about what exactly is Azure Stack. So when we talk about it, there are three elements that you get with Azure Stack. One is it's a consistent development environment between Azure and Azure Stack. And that basically means that the tools that you use to actually develop your applications are basically the same between Azure and Azure Stack. The user experience that you have, for example, when you walk up to Azure and create a virtual machine or create a web app, is exactly the same that you get in Azure and Azure Stack. So the customer and developer does not have to retrain.
And I have to say, I've experienced this firsthand where I've done demos of Azure Stack and I'm talking to a customer and they're like, well, when are you going to show me Azure Stack? I'm like, I am showing you Azure Stack. And they say, no, that's Azure. I'm like, no, let me look at the URL. They look exactly the same. They are consistent. So that consistent, there's no retraining goes on there.
And the consistency actually goes layers deeper than that. For example, if you're using an API set, the SDKs that you use to develop applications against Azure, they're the same against Azure Stack as well. So developers don't have to retrain themselves when they actually have to build the application. And so the application patterns that they use in Azure is the same thing as in Azure Stack as well. And the next thing is about, it's about bringing Azure services on premises. Customers can actually deploy serverless computing. If they want to deploy on Azure Stack, they can deploy app services, they can deploy containers, virtual machines. They have the opportunity to use Key Vault, which actually allows you to securely secure credentials, for example, in an environment, if you will. You can actually set up sophisticated networking topologies using the software-defined networking capabilities in Azure Stack. I can't tell you how fascinating it is to see, when you talk to developers and they can actually spin up firewalls and virtual networks and connect them in sort of ways which it would take, months on end if you were to actually go talk to physical networking to actually do this. And now you can do it at the click of a button. So it's pretty fascinating to see how people are using that innovative technologies. We've got cognitive services which are available in Azure. They're available as containers. You can actually bring them down on Azure Stack and actually offer those capabilities to customers as well. And lastly, the way Azure Stack is delivered to customers is actually through purpose-built integrated systems. Now, we've got a lot of experience under our belt to actually build Azure. So we really know how to build these large-scale systems, make sure how to operationalize them, make sure how we know how to update them, patch them, monitor them. And so we've taken all those learnings and then taken the complexity of having the customer build the cloud. So we do the hard work of building the cloud with our hardware partners. So the customers can primarily focus on application development and consuming the cloud.
Awesome.
Why don't you tell me a little more about HCI?
Well, I'm going to let everybody just take that in for just a moment because Azure Stack is incredibly powerful and it has been a shining example of us, really taking hybrid to the ultimate and delivering, that application consistency, delivering Azure services on premises. And so now we also want to add to this portfolio Azure Stack HCI solutions. And really there's a bunch of really fantastic scenarios to when to use it. A number of things really come to mind. Of course, the traditional one is consolidating your servers. You've got some servers out in your infrastructure and you really want to modernize those. And if you look at some of your traditional servers, there's a very good chance that you've got some aging hardware in your infrastructure. Leases, standard leases on servers used to be 3 to 5 years, and we used to see people upgrade their servers pretty predictably. Over time, we've noticed that people have been really staying on older and older servers, and now the median age is 7.5 years, sometimes 8, 9, even 10 years people are running 10-year-old servers. And it's at this moment where I'm like, the hairs on the back of my neck start to stand up because 10-year-old server is just lacking a ton of security things that we have done with our partners and hardware. There's no TPM, the Trusted Platform Module. There's no UEFI, secure firmware. There's no TPM, secure boot. All of these capabilities that we use to harden and secure from the moment you press the power button just doesn't exist on these older servers. And so we want to help folks that want to refresh that aging hardware. In addition to security, of course, is just performance and resources. You look at a server 5 to 7, 10 years ago, you're talking 2 to 4, maybe 6, 8 cores on them, maybe max, maybe limited to 32 and 64 gigs of RAM. Now you've got servers with, we measure memory in terabytes. We're talking core counts easily, in the hundreds all of a sudden. Even on 2-socket servers, we're saying, 60 plus cores in them easily. And so when you take lots of cores, lots of memory, and infuse those with flash, and the most amazing things going on with flash storage to really minimize latency and drive up performance, all of a sudden now that refreshing of aging hardware, the consolidation of server infrastructure really goes hand in hand. And you can do a tremendous amount, even as low as a 2-node HCI solution. In fact, this is an area where we've seen a lot of people very excited about the fact that, I may have a small branch office, a small retail, or a small coffee shop, and I've got, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 of these. Well, the difference between running 4 servers or even 3 servers compared all the way down to 2 servers can really dramatically reduce your costs if you need to scale out and have those servers at the edge like that. So there's a bunch of work that we're doing with HCI to really go after these scenarios for refreshing the hardware and consolidating. And of course, critical to this is connecting to cloud. We want you to be able to take advantage of the best of what the cloud has to offer when you're running in an Azure Stack HCI solution. So some scenarios to really think about. Storage, of course. The fact that you can do so much now in terms of latency, in terms of performance, because the latency is so dramatically reduced. There's things that we have done, for example, to embrace the latest and persistent memory technologies. Intel Optane DC solutions is a perfect example of that. If you look at flash storage. Flash storage, when initially came out, was something you plugged in your USB stick, and it was USB 1 at the time. Flash storage got faster and faster, and all of a sudden USB became the bottleneck. So what did we do? We actually took the flash storage and we attached it inside your system via SATA or SAS. All of a sudden, Flash became even faster, and all of a sudden, SATA and SAS couldn't keep up. So what did we do? We actually took Flash and we created a brand new connector called NVMe, and that way you could put it in your laptops. Well, now even NVMe has become too slow for Flash. And so every time we take Flash and it gets faster and we change the connector, what are we doing is we're actually reducing the latency and we're moving it closer and closer to the processor. Well, now we've gotten to the point where Flash is so fast that we're actually putting it in DIMMs. And so it literally sits in a DIMM socket right next to the processor. Well, what this means for storage is dramatically improved performance, being able to do incredible things in terms of SQL, for example, to be able to run vast data sets on an Azure Stack HCI solution. So there's a whole bunch of really interesting things we're doing there. For those remote branch offices, like I said, being able to scale all the way down to 2 nodes while still providing failover, providing you high availability is pretty amazing in and of itself. And of course, the consolidation, being able to go from racks and racks of servers. We've reached a point now where, 5, 10 years ago, what used to take a rack or 2 of servers, I can now do a half rack of servers on modem systems with lots of cores, lots of memory, infused with Flash. So there's a tremendous amount of capabilities that we're offering there. So when it comes to connecting to Azure, of course, we want to enable hybrid operations. And let's go down to that 2-node example. So say, for example, you've deployed lots of 2-node solutions in coffee shops or retail environments. The fact that it's so small creates its own challenges. Because you wanted to keep it so small, well, how do you back this thing up? Well, do you bring in another backup solution? Do you deal with tape? Well, wouldn't you just take advantage of the cloud? In fact, since I'm running these workloads and I want to back them up, why don't I just a couple clicks back these right up into Azure? If I want even additional hybrid operations, maybe I actually want to replicate some of these servers and actually replicate a specific VM right into the cloud. Do that as well. Well, in this branch environment, what if I want to ensure, of course, that I have a secure connection in Azure? Traditionally, that means I got to go buy a VPN appliance or something, some piece of hardware to connect this. Well, what if I could give you a software-defined Azure network adapter that creates an encrypted tunnel right into Azure in Azure Stack HCI? Well, guess what? That's exactly what we're doing. So we want to create these really awesome hybrid scenarios and, of course, leverage the software-defined infrastructure in Azure Stack HCI. Now, one of the most important things I want to point out is for folks that know Windows Server, if you know Hyper-V, if you know Storage Spaces Direct, if you know our software-defined networking, this is going to feel super comfortable, okay? You're going to go, oh, I know this. I know Hyper-V. I know Storage Spaces Direct. I know the software-defined infrastructure because that's what we're using in Azure Stack HCI. So all of the skills that you've learned, learning how to manage our software-defined infrastructure, whether it's using PowerShell, whether it's using Windows Admin Center, or whether it's other tools that you already know, guess what? It's going to feel super comfortable. And of course, these are validated solutions. So we want to make sure that you can get up and connected and running right to cloud as quickly as possible. Obviously, we give you the option if you like to, build your own systems. We've always had that with Windows Server. If you want to build Windows Server solutions and build these solutions together, you can. But with Azure Stack HCI, we want to take out any sort of guesswork. These have been validated. They've been tested under stress. We put all the components together. We work with our partners, and we've delivered these validated solutions so that you can get up and operating the cloud very quickly. When it comes to hybrid operations, like I said, Azure Site Recovery, in literally 2 clicks, I can have a VM replicating up in Azure. Cloud Witness. Cloud Witness gives me the ability to actually use the cloud to actually help provide a witness for my failover clustering and my high availability solutions.
Yeah, that's how you probably build really small clusters like two nodes.
It's one of the ways. One of the things we wanted to do for our 2-node solution is we wanted a connected cloud witness solution, but we also ran into scenarios where someone said, I have a dodgy, maybe I don't want to use the cloud for it. I'd actually like to use a local solution. And so we can actually use your local router as well. So we actually have both capabilities. But Cloud Witness just makes it real easy, and we're using the power of Azure to help you with that. Azure Monitor gives you a way now out from the cloud to actually help you manage not only your infrastructure, but your apps. So imagine being able to use Azure Monitor, again, in that small 2-node scenario where you probably just got a couple of apps running. Azure Monitor can help you with that as well without requiring additional services. You can take advantage of the services already up in Azure without consuming services right there at the endpoint. I mentioned backup already, and of course there's update management. Think about, again, a solution where you're a large organization and maybe you're an enterprise and you're using Azure, maybe you're using Azure Stack in the data center, but you also have all of these branch offices. And how are you managing those? Wouldn't you like to be able to use Azure Update Management to provide a consistent way to patch at the edge as well? So being able to give you all of these hybrid solutions and hybrid operations in Azure Stack HCI is critical to how we think about this portfolio of Azure Stack solutions. And then from a software-defined infrastructure, as I mentioned, Hyper-V, software-defined compute, our software-defined storage and Storage Spaces Direct, Azure Network Adapter. So in just a couple of clicks, you have a secure tunnel right into Azure without requiring any additional hardware, using our built-in VPN solution built into Windows Server. And of course, clustering for HA. Then, of course, we've got validated solutions where we have architecture, hardware, and topology. We've got deployment, configuration, provisioning. And then this validation, you can see that it consists of a lot of different things. We, of course, have our Windows Server testing requirements. We've got testing of the NICs, storage devices, failure injection, management, and stress testing. So when you put all of these things together, it really gives you a fully end-to-end validated solution that you can deploy in confidence. And so rather than spending time trying to figure out, well, what speed NICs do I need for this amount of cores and this amount of VMs and this amount of memory and this amount of IOPS, you know what? you can buy a configured solution that says, hey, I need to run this many VMs and I need this, for my traditional workloads, and I can connect it up in Azure. This is ready to go. So it's about removing the guesswork.
And the good news is that Azure Stack, right, at the underpinnings of Azure Stack, the infrastructure of that is today uses the innovation from Windows Server. It uses the software-defined infrastructure from Windows Server, and because it's the same consistent infrastructure, even the validation that we do with engineering hardware partners for Azure Stack actually builds upon the validation and test suites that they run in the context of Azure Stack HCI.
Yes.
So we're also making it easier for partners who already are Azure Stack HCI partners, for them to be able to do that validation once and then add the additional tests that are required for Azure Stack, so that's how we can actually build a partner ecosystem which is actually robust, but actually provides a co-engineer Azure Stack solution.
That's a really great point that shows how these building blocks of testing are actually, are helping improve the solution, improve the validation across the entire portfolio. So how can someone buy some of these, starting with Azure Stack?
Well, as we just talked about, the validation, Azure Stack is actually delivered to customers as an integrated system. Now, if you step back and look at Azure, it's probably the world's largest integrated system because we go all the way from, writing our own firmware and, making sure that firmware is compatible with the software that we run on top of those systems. We actually have our own networking infrastructure as well. All of these things go to really make Azure robust. So we took a leaf out of that book and learned from how you build actually these large-scale systems, and we sort of brought that learning into how we've actually built Azure Stack and co-engineered it with our hardware partners. So what we've really done is, made sure that it takes the guesswork of building the cloud out from our customers, and between us and the hardware partners, we co-engineer that part and actually help build out the cloud, so that the customers can then focus on actually consuming the cloud as opposed to having to focus on the build out of the cloud, which, as we've learned from Azure, is a fairly complex task and it's hard to get right. So we've really allowed the customer to focus on getting business value out of the cloud as opposed to spending a lot of time, effort, and money in actually building out just the actual cloud itself. And so all the work that we do with Cisco, Dell, HP, Lenovo, etc., in terms of actually doing the co-engineering and the validation, which is not just a one-time validation, but it's an ongoing validation as the cloud is a robust, living, breathing thing, and it gets updates almost on a monthly basis. So we have to do this continuous validation between us and the hardware partner. And that's how you actually get the robust value proposition of Azure Stack. And the good news is this builds upon the kind of validated solutions that customers build with Azure Stack HCI as well. And so tell us a little more about sort of how does the Azure Stack HCI validation program work?
Yeah, Azure Stack HCI is a little bit different because one of the things that we wanted to do was build on the flexibility that we've had with Windows Server solutions. Folks like the ability to be able to, get a little more flexibility in terms of, hey, I prefer this NIC, or I prefer this partner, or I prefer this platform, et cetera. And so we wanted to provide a little bit more flexibility there, but at the same time, we also want to make sure these are tested, these are validated, these are hardened, we run these under stress, so that again, the customer is really focused on, okay, do I need a small solution, do I need a medium solution, or do I need a large solution? That's really the kind of question they want to be asking, not this NIC versus this type of storage, or how many IOPS are in this. No. I want to be able to focus on, I need a small, I need a medium, or a large, and I need to run a medium amount of VMs, and it gives me this amount, I'm ready to go. And at the same time, it'll be delivered to me as a validated solution that I don't have to go through my own set of, burn-in tests or things like that. And more importantly, it's delivered and validated, and now I can begin connecting to Azure services. Yep. And I can be able to take advantage of, oh wow, easy backup, easy replication, easy connectivity, and take advantage of what those services can bring to me and help me manage my on-premises as well. So it's connecting to those Azure services, but it is using those software-defined infrastructure. As you mentioned, you're using Azure Stack, you're using the HCI components of Windows Server and Azure Stack. One of the things I feel like to have to remind people is, Azure, big Azure itself, we're using the same hypervisor. We're using software-defined technology in Azure. This is something we have learned for doing years and years of, how many regions are we at? 54 now?
54, yeah.
54 regions and millions of servers. We've learned a thing or two about how to deploy hardware. And so we're really excited to be able to partner with our hardware partners to deliver these integrated systems and these validated solutions. And with that, we also have a bunch of these folks named. So here are our Azure Stack Integrated System hardware partners.
And this actually reflects, sort of the ability for us to be able to build upon the strength of our partner ecosystem. So and there's no surprise, actually, there is almost 100% overlap between the partners who offer Azure Stack Integrated Systems with those offering Azure Stack HCI systems as well. And this is there because of the approach that we've used, which we actually build upon the software-defined technologies in Windows Server, which a partner can validate for an Azure Stack HCI solution, and then we add some additional validation and testing on top of that and the build out, which allows them to offer Azure Stack Integrated Systems. So as you can see, we've got a very robust ecosystem of partners for both Azure Stack HCI and for Azure Stack Integrated Systems. And I think you should feel confident that we've got the engineering in place to make sure that we've got a family of solutions ranging all the way from offering Azure, obviously, to Azure Stack, which offers cloud on premises, and to Azure Stack HCI for those heritage systems and for modernization of the underlying infrastructure. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about our portfolio, and we look forward to hearing and getting some feedback for you.
And if there's anything I want to leave you with is really the overall cloud strategy we've talked about today. We've talked about Azure, we've talked about Azure Stack, we've talked about Azure Stack HCI, and I hope it's really obvious what our cloud strategy is. It's really quite simple. We want to provide you the best cloud whenever and wherever it makes business sense. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.